What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 games that I think are worth getting 100% on. And doing just that for each of these titles was an enjoyable experience for me for one reason or another, which we'll discuss. But I 100% a lot of games. People ask me for my opinions on them, or more specifically, which ones were a lot of fun to do, which ones were more of a chore. Now, for me, that's a bit of a challenging question because obviously they're kind of all worth doing for me, as I run a channel kind of centered around that. But of course, the experience to be had in getting that done varies game to game. So with this list, I wanted to share some 100% that I think are worth the time to do and offer an enjoyable experience or just a unique time in general. And it must be said, that is going to make for kind of a weird list, with a whole lot of games I don't really talk about very much. Kicking it off first with Maneater, a game from 2021 that sees us playing as a shark bent on terrorizing coastal waterways. But of course it's more interesting than that, as we play a shark that is prone to a lot of mutations and thus can be customized in a variety of different ways, all while seeking revenge on one particular shark hunter. By itself, that's a pretty interesting premise and it is pretty fun, but one of the things I really enjoyed about this game was actually something kind of happening in the background. Obviously, sharks mutating this way isn't what you would consider normal, and just the fact that this is a video game would be enough. They actually took that a little bit farther, and throughout the main game you can hear some references to there being something wrong with the water or something being covered up that's causing not just you but a lot of wildlife in the area to sort of do things like this. And then afterwards they put out a secondary DLC called like Truth Quest or something like that, where you take that even farther, and over the course of that DLC you start seeing like actual government experiments and testing being done, which has caused all of this madness and mayhem, which overall just made for a fun, silly experience. Doing 100% on this will likely take you less than 20 hours, which is honestly good because much longer than that and it would more than likely get a little bit stale, as there's really only so much you can do with being a shark. But it is a game where I think the experience of getting 100% was a lot of fun. And that brings us to our second entry, and this is the much more recent Pentiment, which is more of a narrative adventure where we play the role of an artist across 25 years, through which we are investigating a series of murders, all while watching a variety of events play out. And I think the game is worth playing through just for the story alone at least one time. But being a narrative game, you are presented with a lot of choice and consequence, and this allows you to sort of change your approach, do things differently in each individual situation, and then there is a mechanic in place that limits you from investigating every avenue every time. So you're only going to be able to follow up a few leads for each case, which means at least in your first playthrough you'll never be 100% sure about all these things, but also this gives a lot of extra things to do and see if you play through the game a second time, which will certainly be the case if you're shooting for 100%, and you're doing that all while exploring 15th century Bavaria, which is honestly really interesting in and of itself, even discounting all the murder mysteries. And personally, I really enjoyed seeing this particular one from all the different angles, and combined with its relatively short runtime, it's a fun game to knock out that's really good about showing you different things most of the time that you're running through it, which makes for a really enjoyable experience, provided of course narrative RPGs are up your alley, because if you don't enjoy the story, you certainly won't enjoy the rest of the game either. But that brings us to our third entry, and believe it or not, this is actually PowerWash Simulator. Now, it's easy to make a ton of jokes about this because at the end of the day you are quite literally just running a power washer, but to give you my realistic take here, I got 100% on this and didn't even bother to review it simply because I enjoyed it so much. I played this mostly for me, even though I did make one video about it. After that video was done, I continued to play it until I had knocked everything out because I found the experience to be incredibly relaxing. It's a game that's really good at giving you a way to unwind, and while this certainly isn't a game I would encourage people to deliberately try to 100% per se, I do think it's a great way to, again, just kind of unwind, and playing through all the levels and the actual main story that the game does have was a lot of fun. And PowerWash Simulator is a game that is really great at showcasing that games can be a large variety of things, but more than anything, it was just a good time with a sort of ASMR effect, which makes the game really enjoyable, even if the concept is kind of silly. But I can honestly say that I really enjoyed this game, which is why I knocked this one out on my own time. That, though, brings us to number 4 on the list, going in a vastly different direction with Vampyr. a game set in 1918 London during both a regular plague and also a more supernatural one, which has caused an outbreak of vampirism, and you, as a doctor recently turned into a vampire, are in a unique place to solve it, which is a pretty interesting thing in and of itself. But what I think really makes Vampyr worth the 100% is the way the game's difficulty actually works. You see, difficulty in this game, and thus the experience, is largely scaled based off of how many people you choose to feed on, because part of your role in this game is trying to keep the districts healthy and getting through this the best that they can. However, you can, as a vampire, choose to go the opposite direction and just start killing and feeding on everyone, because this will give you more experience to buy more abilities with, thus making the game easier, but plunging the city into chaos. And the intertwining of these mechanics even affects the last boss, which I won't spoil here, of course, but is a thing. Combine that with a few different endings, also kind of centered around how many people you killed or how many parts of the city got essentially destroyed, leads to a lot of outcomes, and it's a game that's really fun to play. I would say the main knock against it is the combat's not very fun, and some of the weapon collection achievements can be a bit tedious, though they certainly aren't difficult by any means. But the reason I really enjoyed checking Vampyr out was mostly just seeing how that difficulty interacted with the actual game mechanics, which is something typically more associated with the Souls-likes that you often see. For instance, using summons in Elden Ring is often considered an easy mode, and magic as well. And while that's certainly true enough, I think the way Vampyr did it is much more interesting to me personally, which is why, of course, it's on this list. That said though, that brings us to our final entry, and I just couldn't leave this without putting some sort of CRPG on here, which is why we are talking about Wasteland 3. Now, I love CRPGs in general, and while I wouldn't consider Wasteland 3 my favorite, even though it is among my favorites, it is definitely the one I had the most fun getting 100% on, and that's largely down to all of the different ways things can play out. There's tons of choice and consequence, little things that make the world feel alive. There's all sorts of endings. There's a sort of perfect ending that can be a little difficult, but the game gives you a ton of hints about, along with some secrets that were fun to decipher and sort out. So much so that this is a game I just really couldn't put down until I had got everything, which is why on Steam I am personally responsible for several of the guides there. I contributed to the 100% guide on Steam, along with individual walkthroughs for various things, such as the best set of armor in the game, that type of stuff. But more than anything, Wasteland 3 just had a ton of really enjoyable elements, secrets to find, that type of stuff, all kind of laid out in a way that made them somewhat accessible without being over the top, which made it feel very rewarding to finally figure all this stuff out, as well as go through the game multiple times to see how different things played out to get different endings. And on top of all that, it had a pretty enjoyable combat system as well, with a large variety of builds, all of which made for, again, the CRPG that I probably enjoyed getting 100% on the most by far, even if the game itself is not my favorite. But that is really going to do it for today's video, and while I certainly don't expect anyone to get 100% on all of these, I do think that experience for each one of these titles offered something unique, which is why they stick out in my memory so much. But nonetheless, let me know what you think about them down in the comments section below, which means, of course, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.